Welcome back, everybody. It's been a week since last time I spoke to you guys. I was out with an illness, so thank you all for the nice messages you've sent me. And thank you for all of the great reports on the meetings that you guys had with your development professionals. They were excellent to read, and I'm very grateful for it. So, look, this week, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into a couple topics which I think are pretty fun, including women in philanthropy, engaging multicultural groups, and then talking about international fundraising. So, for this, again, we're just focusing on that text. You guys are not required any longer to read any of the information about the academic resource modeling, because I think we've taken that as far as we need to go in terms of giving you an idea of what it is. And so really from here on out, the course is really just going to focus on the fundraising principles. So now that you have the basics of the modeling, you know that. Now we're just going to talk really about how to engage groups and how fundraising actually occurs. And so to get started, let me share my screen. And we'll start talking about women in philanthropy. So as many of you know, women make up a significant portion of philanthropy, as they're more than half the population of the world. They definitely play an important part in looking at the future of philanthropic endeavors. So one couple things that we gathered from the readings and from some outside research is that although women today have more access to education, income, and wealth, they remain underrepresented and under-asked as donors. And what I find through experience and what you may have seen through your own experience in your own institution is often it's for silly reasons. Often it's when addressing an envelope, are we addressing it to the husband and the wife, or are we addressing it just to the husband, or is the husband first and not the wife first? All of those things play into a general feeling that, amongst women, that they're not being solicited as as often, are being asked to support as much as men have, which is interesting because again, too, they're the ones that many of you know from your institutions that have an increase in enrollment is coming from women, and therefore the alumni populations, the population that are holding degrees, is shifting more towards being heavily held, more so by women than men. A broader, more comprehensive approach presents opportunities to fully involve women as leaders and donors across the university. So really, what we're saying with that is that what women seem to be showing, at least what the data suggests, is that they prefer to be involved in the charity that's asking them for something, and not so much just giving just because or just giving to participate. They want to feel part of what's happening. They want to be part of the solution. And so they want a deeper connection to what their money is going to be able to do. And that's across the university. A good way to think about that is looking at and providing opportunities for women to volunteer in boards, women to become involved and help the university function outside of just their dollars given. Interestingly, women are twice as likely as men to use their wealth for charitable purposes. So again, we go back to the why the pendulum swings so heavily in favor of women. Frankly, they're just more charitable. They're more able to and wanting to use that wealth to benefit others. Women are more motivated by empathy for others than men. For men, giving is more often about self-interest. Now, of course, it's hard to paint all men with a broad stroke, but for our purposes, we're just talking in generalities. And generally speaking, and the data suggests, women, whether that's because of their upbringing or other factors, socioeconomics, whatever it is, tend to be more of a group thought, more empathetic, more willing to help others, more wanting to find fulfillment by helping others, whereas men, in the general terms, tend to give because of some type of opportunity for themselves, whether that's recognition or whether that's a tax incentive. But women on the whole, generally more empathetic and seem to give more often. Some other observations that we made, research has shown that women are more likely to give to organizations where they have a special personal connection or an alignment with political or philosophical beliefs. Again, this moves away and is a little bit different than men. Generally, men will give to organizations they belong to, but they may not necessarily uphold all of the beliefs of that organization. And so it may be that they give a participation gift to your alma mater, but aren't necessarily on board with all of its or um, most of its values. Can include if you've talked to people out there and even amongst your own families about some of that discussion about how liberal a university is or how conservative a university is. Generally speaking, men will participate and give to that university, even if it's opposite of what their personal beliefs are, as a token of just loyalty and support. Where women, for sure, want that deeper connection and tend to give more towards things that they actually agree with philosophically and not give to things they don't agree with. And again, too, empathy plays women's deep drive and part of their engagement to nonprofits. We talked about that a little bit before. Interestingly, single women are more likely to give and give more than single men. I probably goes without explanation, but just as we've talked about with empathy, as we talked about women as a whole being more charitable than men, it doesn't seem to be changing based on marital status, and it still holds that single women are more likely to give over single men. For single and married women, life satisfaction increases most when they increase their giving as a percentage of income. So again, looking for that deeper connection, they actually enjoy giving, they find some satisfaction with it, and the more they give, the more happy they are. Now, of course, all of you think critically, and you could possibly say, well, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Maybe that their ability to give bigger gifts, they were happy to begin with. But for our purposes and for what the reading's suggesting is that life satisfaction increases the more that women give. For women, there's a strong connection between their deeper involvement as volunteers and subsequent increased giving to those organizations. Kind of like what we talked about before, but just at a deeper level. The biggest way from the research that suggests to get women to give and get women to give more often is to involve them beyond the dollars asked, involve them to be on committees, involve them for their expertise, ask them about ways to approach the market, ask their opinions, and then it would suggest that those women were more likely to be engaged, more likely to feel value, more likely to enjoy some type of benefit from giving and supporting your institution, and will do so in the future. Some of the research that we found suggests that single generation X and millennial women are holding their own in giving comparable to older and pre-baby boomers. This is interesting because essentially what it's saying is that with the younger generations, that they are just as charitable as the older generations. And why this is important is because generally you're thinking about older generations as having more wealth. Older generations are more likely more established in their life, more likely maybe their kids have gone and graduated, and so they seem to have more income. But statistically, they perform just as well as Generation X and millennials. Now, not in terms of total dollars that they're giving, but in terms of how many gifts they give. Are they giving, period? And Generation X and millennial women are just as charitable, even with less income, than pre-baby boomers and the baby boomers. Young Generation X and millennial married women have more influence in charitable decisions than their baby boomer, pre-baby boomer counterparts. This is interesting too, because it's telling you that those younger generations hold more sway in that household decision of where they're going to give their money and if they're going to give their money. So it's showing the influence of women, especially in those younger generations, to really dictate and to really control a lot of what is happening charitably in the household. And some of the general thoughts on how women give is that they tend to distribute their gifts more broadly. So instead of giving $100 to one program, they may give $10 to 10 programs, but they're still giving money, but it's just that it's covering more bases. Because like I said before, they're a little bit more empathetic and a little bit more concerned about organizations as a whole and being able to support multiple organizations that are doing good. They often give together. So oftentimes women will give in what are like either giving societies or groups that are actually collected to help them decide and to support where they want to give as a collective group. So using their money more powerfully combined together as opposed to just one-off gifts. They leverage technology bigger into social media, bigger into all forms of communication, and therefore the gifts that they're making are reflective of that. They're more likely to give online, they're more likely to give through, again, social media posts or special events. And they look at that giving holistically. So they tend to look at the institution as a whole and saying, what can I support this year that will help make a difference? And knowing that that may not necessarily be the thing that they support again the next time around. Again, looking more holistically at the institution's health and not becoming too focused into one specific area for too long. So here's some strategies on cultivating gifts from women. What the research has shown us is that creating community and focusing on impact were more of a priority than competitiveness of the annual fund. So traditional annual funds, traditional university giving is much like athletics. It's geared around competition. It's geared around an annual cycle, and it's geared around kind of an immediate need, where really focusing towards women, you really want to step back a little bit from the immediate need, step back a little bit from the competitiveness, and do a more of a family holistic approach, which says, what can we do? And this takes time to develop to have the biggest impact. And how can we do it? And what are the university's real priorities when it comes to being transformational? That has a much better message to women than the prior. Women are less likely to appear on prospect lists for major or planned gifts. I think this in here because I thought it was interesting myself. And really the reason for this isn't that they're not giving the money, because like we've talked about, they are. But interestingly enough, because they tend to give holistically, because they tend to take the $1,000 and break it up into $100 gifts to different places, they don't appear as a major donor to any one place. And that can be deceiving. So when you're looking at your own women in philanthropy at your own institutions, one thing to look at, what I would do really quickly is say, okay, how much are women giving? And then how frequently are they giving? And I think what you would find out, or what the statistics would say you'll find out, is that you'll see that women are actually giving more often into more places. So while the dollars may be a little bit above men, or maybe even be the same or less in some cases, for sure they're going to be giving more often and giving to more areas. And so when thinking about them as prospects, you really have to think about their giving as a whole and value their giving at that amount rather than at one individual gift. And so they, again, can be often overlooked just simply because of the way they tend to give gifts. We've talked briefly about this, but a little bit more detail. Those giving circles we talked about are collective giving groups. So individuals pool their contributions and decide together how and where funding will be allocated. And this seems to be a good strategy for getting women to get involved. It's a strategy that a lot of universities implement. They may have women in philanthropy groups or other groups that essentially draw women together and say, as an educated group, how can we approach you and how can we educate you on what's going on with the university, and as a group get you to decide what it is you'd like to support. I think it's a fantastic model and seems to be growing all over the place. Women donors gave 61% of the total dollars raised on Giving Tuesday. I think this is interesting because, again, it's that emerging technology. It shows you that, okay, with technology Giving Tuesday in this case, the percentage that's just higher with women participating. So giving 61% of the total dollars definitely tells you that they're a viable group for that type of fundraising. Sorry, my computer is every once in a while wanting to be annoying. Okay, next slide. Oh, so it's essential to acknowledge that gender matters. In closing, you definitely need to realize that gender matters, and that in philanthropy, the one-size-fits-all fundraising model is definitely obsolete. And so we need to be more nimble. We need to look at things such as women as an individual group and cater more to what it is their expectations are to make our university competitive. Because honestly, if you're not doing it, another group will. and that's where they will likely give their support. Okay, moving on to our next group is underrepresented communities. So this can be minority groups, this can be LGBT, this can be just a whole swath of groups that generally are not um, traditionally programmed to in philanthropy. And I'm not going to surprise any of you, but generally the overall market in philanthropy has traditionally been 50-year-old plus white males. And of course, just with everything going on in society over the last couple decades, that's drastically changing. So that's resulting in a difference in how the institutions are responding to the market and how they're approaching different communities, just like women, except now we'll take a little bit look at some of those other communities that have some unique features for fundraising. So here in the current environment, many of you know that what the census predicts, American minority groups will be the majority population by 2024, with Latino Americans and African Americans becoming the top two ethnic groups in the country. Sharing this just so that you know that that tide is coming, in the sense that at some point, um, the majority of the folks that you're going to need to market to will not be the folks that you traditionally have, or have had at the university foundations in the past. Okay, but interestingly, but because today's consumers now have access to targeted information, that is information specific to culture, life stage, interest, politics, or gender, they're much less willing to filter through general content to find the information that is most important to them. You all know this, you all live this. People tend to navigate to things that they're familiar with, the things that support their ideals. And so at an institution, if you're still popping out general information or information that is just too vague, you're going to really turn off these minority groups or these underrepresented groups, because they're not going to see that as something of interest to them. They're not going to see themselves in those publications, and they're going to know that it's not speaking to them, it's speaking to someone else. And so just knowing that the way the information has to change has become more customized and more reflective of what they're experiencing. And the book really does a good job about pointing this out as a great example that alumni want the ESPN experience. They want the ability to look on all the channels available and pick exactly what they want to watch. And that's the same with alumni messaging, that they want to experience specific targeted engagement. So all segments of the alumni population, diverse, young, LGBTQ, Latino, international, and others, come with unique insights. And so on-campus experiences that the universities need to leverage to drive their connection to the institution. So making sure that you're providing content for all of those groups so that they can make it a connection. And if you're not providing content to those groups, then you can't really be surprised they're not engaging with you, or that they're reporting to you that they feel disengaged or unappreciated. Because one thing that we all know and that research has shown is that many of these students of color experience challenges that can include financial aid, shortfalls, isolation within the student body, being segregated, institutional racism, and sometimes mistreatment by faculty and staff. So right away, there's for many students a hurdle to get over. And so the more that you can show and reflect their culture and identity, the greater comfort they're going to feel, and are going to feel that they can support and will support your institution. Here are some successful strategies from the readings. I think this sums it up the best, but ultimately it is just celebrate the best of their culture in a world that rarely does. Find reasons and ways to highlight what's going on within those minority cultures, within those groups, underrepresented groups on campus and their alumni population, that you can highlight to show what good is happening and to show that you're invested as an institution in supporting those groups and supporting success. Provide opportunities for diverse alumni to connect with one another, as well as current students, to whom they can give their time, talent, and treasure to ensure the success stories of the next generation of diverse alumni. This is very similar to what we were talking about with women in the sense that you want to provide opportunities for them to really engage, that being on the sidelines and just writing checks isn't enough, that they want to feel part of what's happening and they want to see the difference that the community is doing and they want to be able to be part of the success stories of not only the institution, but that next group of alumni coming through. African American donors, more than any other group, are interested in supporting their unique heritage and community. A good example of this was giving when the National Museum for the African American National Museum in Washington opened, and just the barrage of gifts that they received from fellow African Americans that surpassed what all of the consultants were saying they should expect. And so their charity was there. They put their money towards that interest group because it spoke to their unique heritage and community. And so if your institution has something similar, if it has a rich history with African American history or even movements, anything of that nature that you can help promote or have them support, could be successful. Latino donors are likely to give consistently when the giving benefits their community because that's where they see the greatest need. So Latinos, a little bit different in terms of they want to see gifts that directly impact the community in which they share. So that's more likely to be given for localized scholarships. That's more likely to see gifts for localized support of researchers or community-based needs within that environment. And so again, just a slight difference, but ones that we think are pretty important to mention. But generally, universities should offer scholarship funds benefiting students of color. And this can be a little bit controversial because you can get into, well, if you're offering scholarships for students of color, why can't you offer scholarships for students of, like, say, Caucasian descent and segment that and just let that be as it is? And this definitely is something that is an area that you're going to have to get a little familiar with at your institution because frankly, all institutions have a little bit different policies on what they allow and kind of what they want to see happen. There isn't necessarily a right answer to this, but just know there are actually universities that do allow scholarships for students of color, but they are fading away. And that is, well, for obvious reasons, just to make things more equitable from the other traditional students and these students. But I think that that's probably going to be something that becomes more and more scarce. I think what you're going to see more of is more of, again, first generation scholarships, maybe scholarships from certain backgrounds in terms of faith, in terms of community groups, different involvement groups that they're part of. This could even take the form of things like Kiwanis or FFA, any of those. What you'll see is more scholarships given there, which traditionally have follow certain lines of typical members. And so in terms of the students of color, there can be, like, for instance, I know at many institutions, there's often Black alumni chapters. And so the Black alumni chapter may have a scholarship fund. And those are good things to have to encourage students or to encourage donors of color to support and give to. But again, it's a changing world and it's a changing dynamic. So I honestly think just that bullet alone is going to be interesting within the next 10 years to see how that develops and to see how people react to it. Is there going to be more scholarships offered that really try to get down and lift up the underrepresented? Or because of the very nature of just segmenting down to the underrepresented, you're excluding others, will the kickback be and where will the comfort level be of where and what institutions do? And I think all of you will kind of be on the front lines of that as you get started in your careers or even mid-career. So keep an eye out for it. Like I said, I don't have a right answer for it other than to make you aware that universities practice different policies on it and get you to start thinking about what it is that you think makes sense in that realm. Okay. So give opportunities to provide diverse donors the ability to support their cultures and build a legacy on campus. And so again, this goes back to a little bit what we talked about before in the previous bullet, but more specifically, allowing things that help build up the culture. If I know, for example, an institution within the book had a celebration where, well, I'll call it a celebration, where they would bring back alumni of color and they would do symposiums, and then all of it centered around back in, let's say, the 60s, where they had a sit-in that was protesting discriminatory action against their students. Their students of color had a sit-in, and become uh, a pretty famous event. And now, kind of to celebrate that action and to celebrate the way the university has changed since those times, now they're having these reunions, bringing people back, allowing people to give contributions to commemorate that event, as well as to provide for scholarships for students that are underrepresented. So again, just providing and looking for ways to do that in your own campus would definitely provide some benefits. Uh, Getting you some more student or giving you some more alumni of color to give, but also helping to build that culture within the campus that says we celebrate diversity, and that we and that when needed to, we can change for the benefit of our students. Okay, our last topic is actually going to be on international fundraising. It's it's a topic that's so broad that I'm going to try to condense it here into, I'd say about 7 slides. But what I want you all to know is that it is definitely a broad topic that we will hit the highlights, and then hopefully it'll spark your interest and maybe you'll dive in a little deeper on your own. But let's take a look at it. So, probably no surprise to all of you that U.S. higher education is seeing a growing level of giving from international alumni and donors. There's the international markets traditionally have been fairly good and therefore getting good returns. Now, I will say that here in the last year, some of this has changed the last 2 years, because if you think about COVID and now what we're seeing in the Ukraine, there's definitely a pause, I think, in some of the growth. So please take this stuff with a grain of salt. Some of these major international incidences are so new that they haven't quite made it down into the research yet, or to be able to show trends happening. So again, take this with a grain of salt. Think of all this as it's ever evolving, but we'll go ahead and go with this statement because this is true for what historically has happened, even though we may be on the cusp of something new. Over the last decades, international student enrollment in U.S. colleges and universities has nearly doubled, and the percent of total U.S. enrollment by international students has risen from 3.4% to 5.3% from 2016 to 2017. And again, you can see it's just tremendous growth, but throwing on the brakes, you see it cuts off at 17. So you don't have the big 2020 coronavirus in there yet, or you don't have the invasion of Ukraine. And so, again, I think we're actually in a transition point, or at least a point where there's going to be a dip and maybe a resurgence. But for sure, what I would expect, what I think you guys see in your own institutions, is a bit of a dip or a bit of a struggle with international students. However, I would say, while that affects current students, your alumni base is what it is, and your alumni base on the whole has been growing pretty significantly with international populations, even despite the most recent year's events. So making sure that you remember that and keep an eye on it. There are still nearly 500,000 international undergraduate students, many coming from elite preparatory schools and families with considerable wealth residing in the US. It's common sense, but most of your international students have significant means because they're coming from families that are sponsoring them, or governments that are sponsoring them in their education in the US. If you think about it, there are very few scholarships for international students, meaning that most of these families are paying full sticker price for their child's education. And because of the restrictions on working in the US, they don't even get the help of some part-time work. So these students are often, these families are paying not only for the full cost of the education, but the full cost of housing and feeding, clothing, transportation, all of that for their student, which is significantly more money than what a domestic student's family puts out. So right away, it just shows you that they should be pushed up on the prospect list just based on capacity alone. So what we want to do is ensure that your institution is thinking globally. They may be a small population, but you shouldn't overlook them because they're heavy hitters, and they're um, uh, definitely valuable, and definitely ones that can help not only increase donors and giving to your institution, but being a possible bloodline for increased enrollment and growth of your programs. I put in here a couple of notes on China just because um, honestly, when most institutions start thinking about what to do globally, they have to consider what to do with China. And really, the fact of it is just that China's the largest, has the largest number of international students and the largest number of American university alumni living abroad. So that's why I singled them out very specifically, just for a couple comments. One of the neat things and helpful things with Chinese alumni and Chinese students is that really higher education sits at that nexus of two of their most important cultural values, and that's families and education and community. So that education and community is a key value for them, and it's becoming commonplace for philanthropic giving to occur. So within your own institution's messaging, if you can focus on education and focus on community building, you're in a much better place messaging to that group specifically. But one thing to know is that the Chinese government has a cap on the amount of money that a donor can legally export from the mainland. So this is also true in India, Korea, and other countries. But making sure you look into that, because if there's a cap on how much they can actually give, then that's going to affect your approach. And so you may be looking at other types of giving or looking at folks that maybe have accounts in the US just to avoid those types of restrictions. But it's definitely important to know. So before you go over and you have an alumni giving officer that wants to ask a Chinese citizen for $1 million, they really need to understand well what the rules are and what's realistic for that person to do. Some of the most wealthy individuals are from Hong Kong, so I think that that's important because China is obviously a very large place. But if you really look at even just starting with the ones from Hong Kong, you're going to have most of your heavy hitters there. So, how to be successful in international fundraising? This includes China, but then also looking at some of the other areas as well. So, how can you be successful? You need to rely heavily on volunteers for the valuable cultural insights, as well as on the ground help as liaisons and more. There's so much diversity and so many issues within countries overseas that a domestic fundraiser really has a lot of challenges. And from the ones that I've spoken with and own experiences, is that you need someone locally there in the foreign country, wherever it is, that serves as your liaison, that serves as your point person, that serves as your person to contact you with others and to help you navigate the culture. Because you can read as much as you want and you can look at as many videos as you want, but the truth is their society, just like ours, is constantly evolving. And so having someone on the ground, having a lead contact is critical. Make sure you look at what your faculty members, deans, and presidents have plans for the upcoming year, because I think what you'll see that there is actually some significant international travel already occurring. And so there may be opportunities for you to piggyback your development work or your alumni outreach work with those visits. That may be asking someone to extend a day to stay longer in a location, to facilitate a visit or to facilitate an event with alumni, or even using yourself or the development officer to meet up and help facilitate those events. But knowing what their travel schedule is in advance will definitely help the university save money and be more strategic and kind of build that excitement around the visits overall. Family matters. We talked a little bit about this with China, but research has substantiated that family ties positively influence a domestic donor's likelihood to give. And so for international students and alumni, this is even more so important. And often because of, again, the amount of resources it takes to send a student from abroad here to the United States and pay full freight for the duration of their education is such a significant investment from the family that they definitely should not be ignored. So you definitely don't want to go over and just visit with the alum themselves. You may ask, to ask them who is important for them to have at the table. Oftentimes, of course, that's going to be a spouse or significant other, but you should also not be surprised when that involves extended members of the family just because of the investment that they've made in that person's education and success. One thing for sure you also don't want to forget, since you're going overseas or since you're looking at international, is don't forget about your domestic born, in this case, American born alumni that happen to be living overseas, because often they're on temporary assignment. They have American assets that makes it easier for giving. And they're part of successful corporations, and they're very often on leadership tracks. So even though they may be a junior member of the team at a corporation now, knowing that just their international experience alone is an indicator of their potential for success and leadership coming up. So making sure that you visit all of those folks and get in contact with all those folks when you are abroad. Some more things to do that can definitely help you guarantee success is create local traditions and signature events. What I would say around this is that they, again, like tradition, like the fact that, okay, we're having an event annually here where all of the alumni and expatriates in London, say, get together, and this is our signature event. Those things are much more successful than trying to just do one-off visits. One-off visits are going to occur where you're going to need to see people, but being able to drive them to where they can network themselves within their own communities is very helpful. Consider how you can include cutting-edge researchers or economists, entrepreneurs from the region, or other fascinating presenters to bring content or value to your audience. One thing that just to be really candid, is that you lose in international fundraising is you lose the allure and the appeal of college athletics. You just simply do. That's not to say that international alumni are not fans, because there's definitely fans that are international alumni, but far fewer than what you experience domestically. And so events such as a watch party for a football game or a basketball game is not quite as well received as one would think, and it's definitely not as well received as it is in the US. But what is more well received are things that are more academically focused and more focused on intellect. And I say this with a grain of salt, and again, it's a little bit of my opinion, but I think if you think about it, it will make sense too. When that international student was first coming over to their American university, it is highly unlikely that sports had anything to do with that decision. Most of the time, that decision was made because of the academic stature of that institution or that specific program. Whereas domestically speaking, I do think that there's a significant amount of students that come to an institution primarily based on where they're located, hence the rise of the state schools. You're located near Manhattan, Kansas, or within the state of Kansas, you're more likely to go to Manhattan, Kansas, or a state school within the state of Kansas. An international student generally has the world to pick from, and yet they picked your institution in the state of Kansas or Missouri. Why is that? More than likely, it's not because of football or basketball. It's going to be because of the academic reputation for that specific program, for an academic reason. Therefore, when you're planning events abroad for those same people, doing things that are more academically based, doing things that help them network with their own academic environment, their own professional environment, is going to be much more successful and received more openly than other things. And so, again, not to say that an international watch party for basketball wouldn't be fun, it would be, but just as a whole, just knowing who your audience is and what motivates them is going to be a little bit different than here in the States. Use alumni chapters across the globe to raise funds for local alumni scholarships that benefit students from their area. So give them a reason to give that isn't just feeling like, oh, you're sending money to the United States. Give a reason to give that's going to allow them to give the same experience they had to a student from their area. This is not unlike what we were talking about with underrepresented populations, students of color, where you're providing those opportunities so that they can send folks to the university that are more like them than not. And so this is the same idea, allowing them to give local, allowing them to give to something that they know and what they've benefited from. Okay, so that is going to be the end of that presentation. Um, I hope you guys again have a great week. Make sure that you look online for our question for our discussion, and then hopefully you're doing pretty good at attending your foundation or alumni event, and that you're getting ready for your papers on either that proposal or that next step for our projects. Again, you guys make sure that you reach out to me if you're having any questions. And again, have a great week. All right. Thanks a lot. Have a good one. Bye.